Alrighty, so welcome to the first preview of the 2024 MLS regular season. As even though the MLS regular season officially kicked off yesterday between Inter Miami versus RSL, this weekend is the first time where every single team will be playing their first game of the season. Well, in the case of Inter Miami and RSL, they're playing their second game of the season. But yeah, I'm gonna try to basically quickly do the preview of the first sport because at the time of this recording, I've only got about 15 minutes before the CCC first leg, first round matchup between Nashville SC and Mocha is about to kick off, and I might miss the first couple of minutes of that game. So when I do the review of the game, I'll mention again where in the first couple of minutes I actually didn't know what the heck happened, and hopefully I won't miss a goal. But that being said, in terms of this first weekend, so one of the things that a lot of people have been hoping Apple TV can do is they try to maybe separate some of these games in terms of Saturday action because there are just multiple time last year people complained that there's just way too many games that is happening between the 7:30 p.m. Eastern window all the way up to 30 minutes past midnight Eastern table, and that of course is a commonly in terms of the MLS 360 show. But it seems like Apple TV sort of listen to their fans in some way, especially in the early month of March, where I know that when I look at the schedule, there's a lot of games, especially in the East Coast, that is going to be happening in the daytime, and it makes sense because it is just way too cold. Even though we're into the first game of the season, and we're into late February, that there are still some East Coast city that there's just no way you can play games that cold. The temperature is going to be in the 30s, and I will not be surprised that well, they do have some of these East Coast team play in the daytime. Not all of them is the case, and I will not be surprised if some of these games might have low attendance, even though it is the opening weekend, and the opening weekend usually brings big attendance. But that being said, let us actually begin the first game because I just spent 2 minutes kind of doing kind of an intro about this preview. And as I said before, I'm gonna keep it simple in terms of talk about what some of these games is because we got 14 games to talk about, with two of them being matinee games, nine of them being the meat of the action on Saturday night, and then we get three Sunday games that's going to be happening this week. Now, the first one is Columbus versus Atlanta United. So this is the one that I mentioned before. I pretty much circled this game on the calendar out of all the game in the opening weekend, though I could argue this game could also be one that I'm circling on the calendar because, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to this game because of the way that last year when both of these teams played in the playoffs, man, that was by far the most entertaining first round game out of all the best of three series that I've seen. Now, this game will start at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, and that in terms of the all-time record, 9-3 and 7 in favor of Columbus, and also the Crew, of course, raising their banner in this game. And if it wasn't for Inter Miami playing against RSL, this would have been the first game, and it would have made sense if you decided to have the team that won the championship to have the first game of the season, just like how we see in the Bundesliga that of course is the case. But in terms of the last five head to head, and that include the playoffs, and what made last year playoffs so special is that we had a 4-2 win in game 3 against Atlanta United before in game 2 it was a 4-2 win in favor of Atlanta United. Or actually, I'm sorry. Game 1 was in favor of the Columbus Crew, and then game 2 was in favor of Atlanta United. There was a couple of 4-2 wins by both of these teams, but it was all by the home team. And then the first game, that was kind of the only dull game out of that best of three series where Columbus absolutely dominated that one with a 2-0 win. And then it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams before the last time both of these teams met in the regular season at Lower.com Field. Yeah, Atlanta fans does not want to remember that game. It was a 6-1 drumming that they had in the hands of the Columbus Crew, though I have a feeling it's not going to be 6-1 in this game. I have a feeling this game is going to be high scoring, and this could be maybe a bit of an early preview in terms of what we might see in the playoffs because these two teams look like are two teams that could do well in the playoffs. Heck, I even predicted Atlanta United to finish first place in the Eastern Conference. So yeah, don't let me down, Atlanta, in terms of performing well straight off the season. And also, I just kind of want to remind people that the opening weekend we're gonna see some resort that is kind of a little bit funky, but it's not gonna be a determinant factor for the rest of the season. I mean, I know there's that old saying, you can't win MLS Cup on the first match week, but you can certainly lose it. But in the case of these opening match week, don't be surprised if things could be a little bit slow and that, this is the first competitive game for both of these teams, and as it is the case for a lot of these teams that did not participate in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. So as much as I said this could be a high scoring affair, don't be surprised. Maybe it could be a little bit tight, at least in the first couple of minutes in this game. Now, moving on, we got LAFC versus the Seattle Sounders. So this is a rematch of last year playoffs in the second round, as this game is going to start at 4:45 p.m. Eastern, 1:45 p.m. Pacific. Notice I didn't put the actual kickoff time. It seems like MLS this season didn't really put the actual kickoff time on their league website like we've seen before, but obviously I can go look at this website called MLSactualkickoff.time.com, where they actually give the at least the accurate kickoff time of when this game is going to happen. It's usually happening like 9 minutes past the advertised kickoff time, and in this case, because it's on Fox, even though they said it's 4:45 p.m. Eastern, I would not be surprised it's 4:55 p.m. Eastern, as usually Fox game are kickoff 25 minutes past their advertised time. But in terms of all-time meeting, 9-4-5 in favor of LAFC, and in the last five head-to-head meeting, including the playoffs, it was LAFC winning 1-0 against Seattle to move on to the Western Conference Final, and they also won 1-0 against Seattle at home the last time both of these teams met at BMO Stadium. Then it was a 0-0 draw between both of these teams, a 2-1 LAFC win against Seattle, and then a 1-1 draw between both of these teams. So whereas this matchup, there should be a lot of action that's going to happen, I don't think that's going to be the case in terms of this LAFC versus Seattle game. This could be a very tightly fair kind of game, and if you expect there's going to be a lot of goals and a lot of action, maybe this game is not going to be the one, unless if LAFC can show that ability with the great attack that they had. But it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they can stifle a really good Seattle Sounders defense. That I think, if you tell me who might have the best defensive record this season, Seattle might be one of the teams that could be favorites this season, have the best defensive record. And then we move on into this first of 9 games that's going to be happening between the busy time of the Saturday night action between 7:30 p.m. Eastern all the way up to 30 minutes past midnight. Though most of these games is going to be happening between the 7:30 p.m. Eastern and 8:30 p.m. Eastern window, as there's actually only one game. That is the late night game in the West Coast game between the Timbers and the Colorado Rapids. But this is the first of 4 that's going to be happening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, and that, of course, is Charlotte versus NYCFC. Now, strangely, Charlotte has never lost NYCFC. In fact, the first 4 matchup between both of these teams, Charlotte has won 3 out of the 4 meeting with a 3-1-0 record, and in terms of the last 4 head-to-head matchup, it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams. Then Charlotte won 3-2 against NYCFC. Then Charlotte won 1-0 against NYCFC. Before the very first ever meeting, Charlotte was able to win 3-1 on the road against NYCFC. So yeah, again, Charlotte strangely have NYCFC number, though obviously last year NYCFC did not had their best of the season, and that obviously this year NYCFC is much more prepared compared to what we saw last year, when they were just pretty much down to the bare bones when they faced that opening game against Nashville SC. But yeah, we'll see whether or not if they can get their first win against a Charlotte team that this is the debut of Dean Smith, and we're gonna see a lot of head coaches that's gonna be debuting, making their first ever match, including one match that's gonna be having 2 head coaches facing off against each other, and that is gonna be their first MLS game for their respective clubs. So yeah, we'll see how Dean Smith do in this first game, and whether or not Charlotte can keep that perfect record against NYCFC. Now moving on, we got DC United versus New England. So all-time meeting 39, 16, and 38, as both of these teams have been in the league for a long time. 2 of the original members of coming into MLS back in '96. Now the last 5 head-to-head matchup, yeah, New England has kind of owned DC in terms of the last 5 head-to-head matchup, and even going all the way back to the shortened season. It was a 4-0 win that New England had against DC, a 2-1 road win against DC, a 1-0 home win against DC, and then DC did win 3-2 against New England, but this is only the only matchup that they actually won against New England in the last 10 matchup, because before that it was a 3-2 win that New England has against DC United. Now keep in mind, the Revs, of course, are fresh off of that CONCACAF Champions Cup first round game when they won 1-0 against Independiente, so they're going to be a little bit tired coming back in this game against DC, but knowing New England has got the better of DC, and DC this season. So far when you look at DC United, they always tend to get off to good starts. So don't be surprised if they can win this game, especially against a tired New England team. But the Revs, again, they have the the number over DC, and they have have been able to beat this team consistently. So we'll see whether that's going to be the same. And then moving on, we got Orlando versus Montreal. So speaking of another team that play in the middle of the week in the CONCACAF Champions Cup first round game, Orlando play against Calgary where they won 3-0, but they had to now go all the way back across the other side of the country because they play this game in Vancouver Island. Now, in terms of the all-time meeting, 10-3-9 over Montreal, so a little bit tightly contested compared to the last two games I mentioned. But the last five head-to-head meeting, Orlando won 3-0 against Montreal before Montreal won 2-0 against Orlando. Then Montreal won 2-0 against Orlando before Montreal winning 4-1 against Orlando City, and then Orlando City winning 2-0 against Montreal. So this is also a game where it's a debut for Laurent Courtois, and we'll see whether or not if this Montreal side, as what we heard about how the reason why Montreal bought Laurent Courtois into this team is because they want to play the system that is very similar to what we see with Wilfred Nancy did, but still, it's going to be interesting and unlike where at least DC has the advantage of playing at home against a team that play midweek. Montreal doesn't have that. They have to go on the road in this game against Orlando City, and they're going to be going on the road for a lot in the beginning of the season because obviously you cannot play home game at Stade Saputo and in Montreal in February since it is still really cold in Montreal in February. But yeah, this should be interesting. And again, Orlando, they played their starting 11 in the game against Calgary. I expect they'll probably play their starting 11 again, and they'll probably rest those guys in the middle of the week, considering they've already pretty much won that tie between them and Calgary, and that they'll probably rest some of their guys in the middle of the week before having another match that's going to be happening in just a couple of days. Now, moving on, in the next one is the Philadelphia Union versus the Chicago Fire. So, in terms of underrated matchup, I think this is a very underrated matchup. I think this could be a matchup that it's between one team that we know, the Union. They've also come off of a midweek game where they had to go down to a hostile environment down in Costa Rica and down in Saprissa and got an impressive 3-2 win. And this is where it can get interesting where, well, that was a big win for the Union. Will there be a letdown? Because especially that they're facing against Chicago, a team that they can easily overlook. And this Chicago team, as I said before, especially from what I've seen in preseason, this is a Fire team that looks good. And this is a team that I think could really surprise a lot of people in the Eastern Conference. But in terms of all-time meetings, 16, 8, and 10 in favor of the Union, and the last five head-to-head matchup, it was a 2-2 draw between both of these teams. A 1-0 Union win over Chicago, a 4-1 win that the Union has against Chicago before the Fire won 1-0 against the Union, and then it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams. So again, it's a very interesting matchup. Again, on paper you would think the Union should be favorites, especially they're playing at home. This is a team that does very well at home for the past couple of seasons, but we'll see whether if they can keep that, especially when they just play an emotional game down in Costa Rica against Saprissa. We've seen so many times when team get an emotional victory, the very next game, especially back in league play, they can suffer a bit of a letdown, and we'll see whether that is going to be the case against Chicago. Now, moving on, in the next one is Austin versus Minnesota United. By the way, I didn't mention, I actually just got this new Minnesota United start kind of night jersey, and I gotta say, it looks even better. The fact that I'm now wearing it compared to when I first saw it, and I've said it before, where in terms of all both of the kits that each MLS team is going to wear, Minnesota's probably have the best out of both their home and away kit, and this one looks absolutely amazing. This one basically is, as I said, it's very similar to the black jerseys that they have as their last home kit, but they just added more detail in terms of just kind of a very kind of a very galaxy kind of look of a jersey. And that, I'll tell you what, I'm really glad that Minnesota designed a good jersey like that. I mean, I'm pretty sure this team won't do very well this season, but at least I'll say that they won the award for probably one of the best jersey in MLS, or at least one of the best home and away jersey out of all the team in MLS. Now, that being said, they are going on the road to play against Austin, and this is a matchup where I think for both of these teams, I know I don't want to say it's a must-win on the opening weekend action, but it kind of has that sense, knowing the fact that both of these teams haven't really had a great off season, and even into the preseasons as well, and that they want to get off to the first match on a win so that they can build some more positive note. Now, in terms of this game. This is also first of 4 games that's going to be kicking off at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. All-time meeting 4-0-3 in favor of Austin, and the last 5 head-to-head matchup. Yeah, the last meeting between the Loons and Austin was a forgettable one. It was a 4-1 win that Austin had against Minnesota before Austin won 2-1 against Minnesota. But then Minnesota won 2-1 against Austin, and then Austin basically won 1-0 against Minnesota before Minnesota winning 1-0 against Austin FC. And keep in mind, Minnesota is going to be a little shorthanded coming into this game. It looks like Reynoso probably is going to be ruled out of this game because he's still dealing with that knee injury. Actually, he re-aggravated that knee injury during one of the training session, which is a big concern. And then obviously there's also concern that Long Wanning is not going to be available in this game because he's been having some visa issue coming back to the US. So this is going to be a very short-handed Minnesota team. And again, this is not the first time I said this because I've seen this happen before where they're a little bit short-handed. In fact, the last couple of years, they've always been short-handed coming out of the gate. And not to mention, not even having a permanent head coach right now. Again, this should be a daunting team task, at least in these first couple of games. And it will be very interesting to see how this team is going to do. And that you would say that even though it's a road game for them, last season, they seems like they're the kings of the road. They love to play on the road, and we'll see whether or not that carries, especially against an Austin team that a lot of people predict that they're probably going to be one of the worst team in the Western Conference this season. Now, moving on into the last game on this board is Dallas and the San Jose Earthquakes. So back to back in terms of talk about my favorite team playing on opening weekend. In terms of the all-time meeting, 29, 22, and 21 in favor of the Quakes. It's one of the rare times the Quakes actually has the better over their opposition. There always tends to not have the better all-time record over their opposition. But in terms of the last 5 head-to-head matchup, well, there's been a lot of draws. In fact, if you like the score 1-1, you probably will enjoy this game because it's been a 1-1 draw last time both of these teams play, and then a 1-1 draw last time both of these play at PayPal Park, and then it was another 1-1 draw before Dallas did win 4-1 against the Quakes, and that was actually their first win against the Quakes since 2016. The Quakes have always have the better over Dallas, though, like I said, recently there's been a lot of 1-1 draw. In fact, 5 out of their last 6 games has been 1-1 draw. But knowing the fact that this is the Quakes and they love draws, as they have on a lot of games this preseason, especially by the scoreline of 1-1, I would bet you this game is going to end 1-1. I mean, that's just how it is. It's been the case for the last couple of games, and that, I mean, a draw coming out of the gate for the Quakes aren't necessarily the worst thing for them. And also Dallas, they have last season they didn't really get off to a good start with them losing to Minnesota at home, and they're looking to try to avoid to do the same thing this time against the Quakes. But again, they don't really have a good record against the Quakes, and we'll see whether or not if that continue and whether or not if this is going to be a 1-1 game. Like, honestly, if this ends up to be a 1-1 game, I'm going to say, what did I say? I knew this game was going to end 1-1 between both of these teams. That being said, I am actually now going to actually watch the Nashville versus Mocha game because I think I've missed like 10 minutes of that game already. But by the time that game hits halftime, I'm going to be looking at the last 6 games to finish up this preview of match week number 1 of the 2024 MLS regular season. Okay, so while it is now halftime in the game between Nashville SC and Mocha, and a little spoiler alert, so far so good for Nashville SC, we're going to continue and finish off the preview for the opening weekend's action, including the last 3 games on the Saturday action and the 3 games that's going to be happening on Sunday. And I like how I pretty much organize it perfectly with these being the Saturday game and these being the Sunday game. But we move on in the next one, and that, of course, is the Houston Dynamo versus Sporting KC. And I gotta say, there's been a lot of rematches in terms of the playoffs, especially in the Western Conference. And this is another one of them, as this is the rematch of the second round of the Western Conference. And in terms of the all-time meeting, 21, 16, and 19 in favor of the Dynamo, and the last 5 head-to-head matchup, and I've got to include playoffs there. Houston was able to win 1-0 against Sporting KC, and that's how they got to the Western Conference final before Sporting KC did win 2-1 against the Dynamo. Then it was a 2-2 draw between both of these teams, and 0-0 draw between both of these teams, and then Sporting KC won 1-0 against the Houston Dynamo. Now, obviously, out of all of the teams that play in the CONCACAF Champions Cup on the road, think Houston will be the one that will be happier. The fact that they didn't really have to travel too much to go to St. Louis, though they'll probably be a little bit unhappy the fact that they lost that game and especially gave up a late goal to lose that one. But we'll see how they will bounce back in this game against Sporting KC, who are looking to not go 0-3-7 in the first 10 game of the season. They're hoping that they're not going to wait until May before they get their first win of the season. Speaking of St. Louis, the next matchup is St. Louis. They're going to be playing against RSL, who has already played a match for this 2024 MLS regular season, but on the losing end, losing 3-0 to Inter Miami, or actually not 3-0, I'm sorry, but it was 2-0 in favor of Inter Miami just yesterday. In terms of all-time meeting, this is only the third meeting between both of these teams. Both of these teams have a win apiece, and both of the team has been able to win on the road as the only two meeting, or at least the road team has been the only one that gets the win between these two meeting between both of these sides, with RSL winning the last road meeting 3-1 against St. Louis before St. Louis absolutely demolished RSL at home by winning 4-0 on the row. And that, yeah, for St. Louis fall that big win against the Houston Dynamo, it will be interesting to see how they're going to do. And especially, it will be interesting to see whether or not if either of these teams is going to rest players. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think St. Louis is probably going to start a pretty strong squad just like they did against the Houston Dynamo, even though I know that second leg is not guaranteed yet, considering that, for St. Louis, they still need to at least get a draw out of that game and hope that they at least get an away goal in that one as well. Because while it was great that they won 2-1 and they were able to get the lead heading into that second leg, that away goal that they gave up is going to be a big thing that is going to be a little bit of a disadvantage for St. Louis and for RSL, of course, knowing they've already played on Wednesday on a short week, have to travel almost all the way across the country in the middle of the country to face against St. Louis. It'll be interesting to see if Pablo Mastrani will stick with the same squad that lost that game against Inter Miami. Now, moving on into the last game of the Saturday action, and this is actually a game where I can actually watch it in full because this is the only West Coast game of the night, and that of course is the Portland Timbers and the Colorado Rapids, starting at 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific. So this is of course the matchup that featured two head coaches making their debut for their respective club. For Phil Neville making his debut for the Portland Timbers, and for Chris Armas making his debut with the Colorado Rapids. Now, all-time meeting 13-7-10 in favor of the Timbers. And anytime when you have a head coach making his debut for their new team, usually you can see there's going to be that new head coach boost. And I won't be surprised in terms of some of these games that feature a new head coach. They might have players that's going to be more up for it because they want to improve or they want to impress their new boss in the first game. But when you have a situation where both team is facing off against each other and both team are having new head coach facing off against each other, that should be a very interesting kind of battle between two teams that I'm pretty sure they're going to be playing very hard for their new head coach and want to impress their new head coach straight away. Now, in terms of all-time meeting, 13-7-10 in favor of the Portland Timbers, and the last 5 head-to-head matchup, it was the Timbers winning 3-2 against Colorado. Then it was a 0-0 draw between both of these teams before the Timbers winning 3-0 against Colorado. Then Colorado won 2-0 against the Portland Timbers, but that's the only time that the Rapids have won against the Timbers, because besides that, this was actually a playoff matchup on Thanksgiving where they lost 1-0 to the Portland Timbers. So again, very fascinating matchup between two head coaches making his debut, and we'll see which head coach is going to get their first win for their new team after this game. Now, moving on into the Sunday action, and we start off with the two matinee game, with the first one being FC Cincinnati versus Toronto FC. Now, in terms of this weekend's matchup, and probably one of the most one-sided matchup in terms of the opening weekend's match, this is probably going to be one because Cincinnati, obviously fresh off of a Supporter Shield win against the team that won the Wooden Spoon, and we said this before, where whenever you have a matchup between a team that was the best team against the worst team in the league at certain point of the season, including on the opening day, you usually think that the team that is the best team in the league will easily beat the team that is worst team in the league, but that's just not how it works in MLS. And in fact, we talked about before in MLS, it's an unpredictable league. Any given Saturday, or in this case, any given Sunday, things could be different. And Cincinnati's got to be careful. They don't just completely disrespect Toronto, especially with the way that Toronto also have a new head coach, and this is the I think this is actually now the official first game that John Herman took charge of this team. Or actually, no, I don't think that's the case. I think he took over back in October, but this is really the first time under this new group that John Herman is taking charge of this team for the first full season. I'm pretty sure players are going to play very hard under him, especially the monumental task that he's going to have to deal with this season for this TFC side. Now, this game, 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific, as I mentioned before. In terms of the all-time record, 6-0-4, but really the last full matchup, it's been pretty much in favor of Cincinnati. They won 3-2 on the road against Toronto, 3-0 last time both of these teams played at TKO Stadium, a 2-0 home win against Toronto, that's Cincinnati, then a 2-1 road win that Cincinnati has against Toronto before Toronto did win 3-2 against Cincinnati. So Cincinnati has beaten Toronto in the last four straight matchup, and it feels like it could be five straight with the way how you would expect that Cincinnati, who is going to be heavily favored and probably the most favored team at home against their opposition on this opening weekend, should get the win. But again, you never know. This is the thing about MLS. It can we've seen some crazy resort, especially on opening day, where with a lot of these teams playing their first ever game, there's going to be a lot of unpredictability that could come in this game. Now, moving on, in the next one, we got Nashville versus the New York Red Bulls. So, Nashville, of course, currently playing against Mocha, and as I mentioned, they've been off to a bit of a good start, although there is a little bit concerning in terms of their number 10, Hani Mukhtar, who actually did get subbed off in the first half of the game. But in terms of this game against the Red Bulls, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. And in terms of the all-time meeting, 2-2 and all in favor of the Red Bulls. It's hard to believe the Red Bulls have pretty much owned Nashville in terms of the all-time meeting. I guess maybe this is where Nashville is the reason why they're trying to sign as many Red Bulls player as possible. Because if you can't beat them, then maybe sign some of their players and basically see if they can do. I mean, again, it feels like this could be maybe a bit of a rivalry when it comes to like former players against or players playing against their former team, because Nashville has just so many players that are used to be playing for the Red Bulls, and it's going to be interesting to see how that's going to go. But in terms of the last five head-to-head matchup, and really the last four head-to-head matchup, because this is only the fifth meeting between both of these teams, it was a 1-0 road win that the Red Bulls had against Nashville before it was a 0-0 draw between both of these teams. That 1-0 road win against Nashville, I think, was on decision day, and that was a huge win for the Red Bulls because that pretty much secured their spot of making the playoffs and continue the longest active streak right now of a team making the playoffs every season. Then it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams before it was a 2-0 win that the Red Bulls had against Nashville SC. And again, if you expect there's going to be some high scoring affair kind of match and a lot of action that's going to happen, I don't think this game is going to be. I think this could be a bit of a low scoring game, especially again if you're in Nashville. We'll see what's the status and the health of Hani Mukhtar. I mean, when he got subbed off against Mocha, he did walk off on his own power, although kind of walking off gingerly, and it looks like maybe this is just a precaution for Gary Smith to not really burn his star player after just one game, especially with the way that they were already in control in that game against Mocha FC. So it'll be interesting to see whether if he will make an appearance. It'll also be interesting to see how many former Red Bulls players will be playing for Nashville against their former team, because as I said, it's weird that for Nashville it just feels like, well, we can't beat the Red Bulls, so let's take some of their former player and hope we finally get our first win against the Red Bulls. And then finally, in terms of the last match of the opening weekend, it's the LA Galaxy versus Inter Miami. So this game originally was going to be kicking off at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, but looks like they pushed it back to 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. But in terms of the all-time meeting, there's only one other meeting between both of these teams, and coincidentally, that was actually the first match that Inter Miami actually played, where they actually had fans in the stands. Of course, during the COVID shortened season, they didn't really have any fans in the stands for any of the game. Well, at least for most of the game that is. But this is the first time where they actually open full capacity in that season opener against the Galaxy, and that was kind of like the David Beckham derby, because David Beckham facing against his former team, and the team that he of course played and made a big name not only with the Galaxy but just a big name in MLS in general. And it'll be interesting to see now they're facing off again against each other. But now the story is that Messi is basically going back to LA again. This is the second time that Messi is going back to LA. We saw last year he made his first appearance in Hollywood by facing against LAFC, and they won that matchup. And now it'll be interesting to see how they'll do against the Galaxy, especially as I mentioned in that review yesterday. One of the biggest concern I have with Inter Miami is that this is not a team that can go full 90 minutes and keep up that intensity, and especially with the way that they got another matchup that's going to be happening in just 3 days. I have to travel all the way across the other side of the country to play this game. I would be very surprised if Luis Suarez could maybe be playing a full 90 minutes or even playing 60 minutes of this one. He might actually come off the bench in this one, because I do feel like Campana probably is the better option for this team, especially with the way that you can see Suarez was completely gassed after he was subbed off. And the same case with a lot of these Miami players too. They look dead tired in the second in half against RSL, and if it wasn't for the bad finishing from RSL, Miami probably would have lost that opening game. But now it'll be interesting to see whether they can show up in this game, especially with the way that they'll still be tired because it's only a 3-day rest, and against the Galaxy team is playing their first game. And whenever you get to play against Inter Miami, I mean, this is where it can kind of work against Inter Miami, where as much as you have all these big name kind of player, when you're gonna play against the opposition, their opposition is gonna be up for it, especially when you playing the opposition is gonna be playing against Messi and friends. So it should be interesting to see how this matchup is going to look to close out the opening weekend of the MLS 2024 regular season. But until either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you like, smash the subscribe button. Obviously, let me know in the comments what do you think of these games to kick off the opening weekend action of the MLS season. And also let me know in the comments below your prediction for all 14 of these games to kick off the opening weekend of the MLS action. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you like, smash the subscribe button. And yeah, I, of course, will see you guys next time.